So now I want to share with you some information about management of single-sided deafness in pediatric patients. If you are attending this lecture hoping that I'm going to have the answers, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I see a lot of challenges in management of single-sided deafness. Unfortunately, the effects of it are not well recognized, and the solutions that we have are imperfect at best. So what is the prevalence of unilateral hearing loss in children? About 1 per 100, 1,000, 1 per 1,000 will be diagnosed at birth. And by adolescence, this will have increased to 14 per 100. Approximately 10% of children with unilateral hearing loss will progress to bilateral hearing loss. When I tried to find the estimates of single-sided deafness, not just unilateral hearing loss, I wasn't able to find that specifically for children, but in the general population, it's estimated to be 12 to 27 per 100,000. I also think when we're talking about single-sided deafness, it's important for us to consider children with significant asymmetrical hearing loss. So those children who have a mild or moderate hearing loss in one ear and severe and profound in the other. I also think it's important for us to recognize that for children who have bilateral severe to profound hearing loss, if we only unilaterally implant them, we actually have created a situation where they now have single-sided deafness, are going to experience some of the same things as children, as traditional single-sided deafness children. So what can cause single-sided deafness or asymmetrical hearing loss in children? About 45% is believed to be congenital. Inner ear malformations account for a large percentage. That can be as mild as EVA to as significant as cochlear nerve deficiency. We know that congenital CMV and the risks associated with prematurity, and specifically those with that can lead to ANSD, auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder, can lead to single-sided deafness or asymmetrical hearing loss, and some syndromes can too. Single-sided deafness can also be acquired from ototoxic medications, meningitis, and head trauma. So how does single-sided deafness impact hearing? I think we all think about localization first, that ability to tell where sound is coming from. And while localization is important for safety, conversation, and the classroom, I don't think it's actually the biggest issue. I think that we have some binaural features that these children are missing that are more important even than localization. The first is binaural summation. Because we have two ears, our brain gets two inputs and it actually adds that information together so that sound is louder and clearer with two ears. Because we have two ears, we also have binaural redundancy, which I would argue is incredibly important. If one ear misses information, the brain has the ability to check with the other ear to fill in that information. Also, because our brain can use information provided by the two ears, it actually has the ability to spatially separate speech and noise. So if we have our little girl here with single-sided deafness at a party, she is obviously going to have difficulty hearing the children on her right side. And the children who are speaking to her even from her good ear are not going to be as loud and as clear as for those of us with normal hearing. But I would also argue that if the parent is playing music in the background as they play this game, that this child is going to have even more difficulty separating out what her friends are saying to her from the background noise. But still, isn't one ear good enough? No. Children with unilateral hearing loss, Judith Liu found on an assessment with the HearQL, perform more similarly to children with bilateral hearing loss and not the same as children with normal hearing. Actually, by high school, approximately 50% of children with unilateral hearing loss will have been retained one grade or have required focused academic assistance. They are 10 times more likely than their typically hearing peers to be academically unsuccessful. And that increased listening effort results in a decreased ability to multitask. I would also suggest that children with right ear single-sided deafness are at an even greater risk. So the right ear, information coming in from the right ear goes directly, because of the crossed pathways in the brain, to the left hemisphere where the primary auditory cortex is housed. This is a short, fast pathway and reaches adult processing speed by about age 5, whereas the information coming into the left ear has to go to the right hemisphere and cross over to reach the auditory cortex. So this is a longer and therefore slower pathway and doesn't reach adult processing speed until well into adolescence. So I would suggest that children with right ear single-sided deafness by age 5 are already functioning on a slower system and less redundant, because they only have one ear, than the other children entering school with them. So what management options do we have? Well, the first is the do nothing, wait and see, one ear is good enough solution. And many parents and professionals choose this option because the challenges of single-sided deafness may not be clearly evident early in childhood. But I would suggest that waiting until the child is starting to fail before beginning intervention is less than optimal. We can try a hearing aid on the single-sided deafness ear, but again, this is a poor option because with severe to profound hearing loss, putting a hearing aid on that ear is going to provide distortion and noise, which can impact or interfere with the better hearing ear. We do have cross hearing aids where a microphone is placed on the poor ear and the signal is sent around to a dummy hearing aid on the good ear. The problem with this is that this receiver on the good ear requires a dome or an ear mold, which can occlude or obstruct some of the hearing in the better hearing ear. If the patient has hearing loss in both ears, but it's asymmetrical, we can use a bicross where the microphone on the poor ear picks up and sends to the hearing aid on the better ear. Now, in this situation, we don't have to worry as much about the dome or the ear mold because we actually have amplification on this side. But in both of these situations, if noise is on the poor hearing ear side, the device can actually be sending noise to the better hearing ear. And neither of these provide actual binaural hearing or binaural speech perception. We can use both bone anchored devices, where the bone anchored device is placed on the poor hearing ear, and the microphone picks up the sound and through bone conduction sends the signal to the good ear. For young children, these are often worn on a soft band, but the soft band is often too loose to provide optimal benefit and optimal bone conduction transmission. And again, we have the same problems where noise on the single-sided deafness ear can be transmitted to the good ear, and there is not true binaural hearing or speech perception. So what about cochlear implantation? Well, this seems an easy choice for adults, but what about for children? Well, if the congenital hearing loss is diagnosed at birth, they fall in the same category as all of our implanted children. The earlier, the better, and imaging is essential to ensure the anatomy is appropriate for implantation. If the congenital hearing loss is missed at birth, then still the earlier the better, but we still need imaging to make sure that we have appropriate anatomy. There's no agreement in the literature on the window of time for implantation, but the literature does seem to show that the listening development of that normal hearing ear may benefit our patients with single-sided deafness. So the window may be open a little bit longer than our children with traditional bilateral hearing loss. If a child has progressive single-sided deafness, then we want to consider hearing consider implantation as the hearing loss approaches 70 decibels. And I talked about this in my presentation on implantation with older patients, and I would suggest that the same things apply for our single-sided deafness patients, because at that point, we begin seeing degraded speech perception. And the same with acquired single-sided deafness. So what are our experiences with single-sided deafness? Because there's not a lot of literature out there. This is a fairly new topic. Well, we have had families who have chosen to do nothing. They've chosen the cross, the bicross, and bone-anchored devices. And we have seen that these provide benefit in some settings, but not in all settings. It's also important that we have a realistic assessment of the benefit, but that is very challenging in the real world and even challenging in the sound booth. We do know that only cochlear implantation provides a semblance of true binaural hearing. But assessing speech perception with the cochlear implant with single-sided deafness is very difficult because we need to eliminate that normal hearing ear. And for children, if we're putting masking into that normal hearing ear and a significant amount of masking in order to keep that ear from helping, then it's very difficult for the children to ignore the masking and respond only in the implanted ear. But let me tell you a little bit about our patients. So we have patients with congenital hearing loss that was diagnosed at birth, and they were implanted before 12 months. So they have normal hearing in one ear, the implant in the other ear. They all want to wear their cochlear implants all their waking hours, and they have open set speech perception that is approaching their normal hearing ear. We have a number of congenital patients whose hearing loss was missed at birth. So it was not diagnosed until they had preschool or elementary school screenings. They were implanted between age 4 and 9. All of them required habilitation, which with the habilitation going directly to the cochlear implant. And once that habilitation was started, they all developed open set listening greater than 60% with their cochlear implant. Our patients with progressive, acquired, or asymmetrical hearing loss, again, the sooner the better. We have seen that the poorest performance and the longest habilitation was with one of our progressive single-sided deafness patients who was not implanted until 5 years after she stopped benefiting from her hearing aid. What are our patients' perspectives on the cochlear implants? Well, some of them say, I hear everything with my device and everything without. This is true. They have no idea what they do not hear. So it's true, they hear everything when it's on and they hear everything when it's off. They also have no idea what they miss when it's on and how much more they're hearing when it's, how much they miss when it's off and how much more they're hearing when it's on. Some of them can tell us it's louder when I put my cochlear implant on. And as long as this is appropriate stimulation and not overstimulated, then they're having binaural summation. They're actually noticing that ability to hear louder and clearer. Some of them say it sounds like Mickey Mouse. And I would direct you to Michael Dorman's work, which I've referenced in the slides at the end, where he shows that it's actually not Mickey Mouse or a robot, but more like the Munchkins from The Wizard of Oz, where the patients report that the low frequency foramen is shifted somewhat upward because the cochlear implant does not go fully into the deepest part of the cochlea. However, if you have colleagues who still think that cochlear implants sound like Mickey Mouse and robots, I would recommend that you look at some of the videos from his work which show patients with single-sided deafness actually telling what it sounds like, matching what they hear in their normal hearing ear to their implant, and it is very good sound quality. So I wanted to share with you just a couple of results from some of our patients. So this is a 4-year-old whose single-sided deafness was diagnosed at birth, and she was implanted at 12 months of age. This is 3 years post-implant. And you can see that at a normal conversational level, her ears function fairly similarly. Now we have to remember that we're putting a lot of noise into her good ear when we're doing the cochlear implant ear. So this ear is at a disadvantage, but still doing well. For soft speech, she is getting good she is accessing soft speech, but this one's really difficult to assess with the right implant alone because of the amount of noise that needs to go into her normal hearing ear. But you can see that binaurally, she's performing very well. On sentence testing in noise, with a signal to noise ratio of +5 from behind, she does much better with her cochlear implant on, and her response time is much faster. This is a 6-year-old patient whose single-sided deafness was not diagnosed until he was age 4.5. They do believe that it is from birth because he did not initially pass his newborn hearing screening, but then the screener passed him on the second round. So this is 10 months post-implant. He was implanted at 5 years of age. You can see that after 10 months of rehabilitation with noise in his good ear, he's scoring 60% at normal conversation, and he is getting some soft speech with the implant. You can see his sentence testing is much better. And in this situation, because he's older, we were actually able to put the noise, so the talker babble is going into his good ear, and the sentences are coming from the direction of his deaf ear. And so without his implant on, he has a very slow response time and many self-corrections. He's obviously using brain power, rethinking the sentence and starting over. Whereas with his cochlear implant on and the sentence is going to that side, he was faster and much more accurate in his sentence production. I also wanted to show you a patient with asymmetrical hearing loss. This patient's hearing loss was diagnosed at age 4. This was the hearing loss that was diagnosed, so quite asymmetrical. He was implanted at age 6. Before the implant, his speech perception was 0 using kindergarten, so about 5-year-old words in his right ear. 6 months after the implant, using adult words, so much harder testing, he was scoring at 80%. You can see that even with the hearing aid, he has a new hearing aid to go with his cochlear implant, he is doing much better. And where he had absolutely no access to soft speech with either hearing aid before, he now, with the combination of hearing aid and implant, is scoring 52% on adult words, which is doing quite well for 6 months post-cochlear implant. So what do we need going forward to help us with this challenging situation? Well, we need more widespread education and recognition of the challenges of single-sided deafness and asymmetrical hearing loss. We need early diagnosis and we need imaging so that we can determine if cochlear implantation is a possibility for these patients. We need better ways to assess and quantify the deficits these patients have with their single-sided deafness. So in the real world and in the booth. We need more support for early implantation of these patients and better ways to assess their cochlear implant benefit directly. We need to develop ways to have calibrated testing from the audiometer directly into the input so we're not having to mask that better hearing ear. And we need better ways to rehabilitate too. Again, get the information directly to the implant so we can strengthen that ear. And we need better options for patients who are not cochlear implant candidates so they don't have access to that binaural hearing. And these are my references. Thank you so much for listening.